Hey everyone! In a world just flooded with information, it can feel impossible to know what's real and what's not. Today, we're going to cut right through all that noise and take a hard look at some of the biggest myths about vaccines, where they actually came from, and what the science really says.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by looking at why these theories catch on so easily. Then, we're going to tackle 3 of the heavy hitters, one by one. The supposed link to autism, the whole microchip idea, and the fear that vaccines can actually change our DNA. And finally, we'll see what the science says when you put it all together.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. With all the information out there, why do these specific ideas seem to stick and spread like wildfire?
It's really like a perfect storm of 3 things. First, you have people deliberately pushing bad information. You mix that with a very human, very understandable fear of new things we don't fully get. And then, you pour social media on top, where algorithms are literally designed to push the most shocking stuff to the top of your feed. It's the perfect recipe for a myth to go viral.
Okay, let's look at our first case file. This is probably the most well-known and most damaging myth of them all. The idea that vaccines are somehow linked to autism.
You know, this entire myth, it all started with just one single small study way back in 1998. But right away, other scientists tried to see if they could get the same results, and they couldn't. Not a single one. It turns out the whole study was basically a fraud. It was eventually retracted, and the guy who wrote it, Andrew Wakefield, actually lost his medical license over it.
But just taking down that one paper wasn't enough, you know? The idea was already out there. So researchers all over the world knew they had to answer this question once and for all. They launched these massive, completely independent studies to get to the bottom of it.
And the scale of this research is just mind-blowing. We are not talking about a few dozen kids here and there. We're talking about studies that, when you add them all up, included over 1 million children. And the result, every single time, was exactly the same. Absolutely no link between vaccines and autism. Period.
So the real takeaway here is that while the science on the exact causes of autism is still evolving, we know it's a complex mix of genetics and environmental factors. But one thing scientists are 100% sure of: it's not caused by vaccines.
All right, on to myth number 2. This one absolutely exploded during the COVID-19 pandemic. The idea that vaccines are a secret plot to inject us all with microchips. You know, this theory kind of falls apart with just a little bit of common sense. The teeniest, tiniest microchip that we can make today is still way too big to fit through the needle of a syringe. It's just physically impossible. This myth really plays on our fears about technology and being controlled. But the reality is that vaccines are biological substances, not tiny pieces of hardware.
And that brings us to our third myth, which taps right into that fear of new technology we talked about earlier. This is the claim that the newer mRNA vaccines can somehow get into our cells and permanently change our DNA.
Okay, to see why this is impossible, you just have to understand how these things work. Think of the vaccine like a temporary message or a recipe. It gives your cells instructions to build one harmless little piece of the virus. Your immune system sees that piece, recognizes it's a stranger, and learns how to fight it. And here's the most important part. As soon as your cell's done with the recipe, it shreds it. The instructions are gone.
The crucial thing to understand is that the mRNA from the vaccine never even goes into the part of the cell where your DNA is kept. Your DNA is in a secure vault called the nucleus. This whole process happens outside that vault. The mRNA does its job, disappears, and your own genetic code is left completely, 100% untouched.
So, we've unpacked 3 big theories: autism, microchips, and DNA. After all that, what is the final verdict? When you look at all the evidence together, what's the conclusion from the scientific community?
Well, the answer comes down to this really powerful idea called scientific consensus. Now that sounds fancy, but it just means it's not one person's opinion. It's the collected, agreed-upon conclusion of thousands of experts all over the world based on mountains of evidence that's been checked and rechecked.
So let's just sum it all up. The autism link, it came from a fraudulent study. The microchip idea, it's physically impossible. The fear that RNA vaccines change your DNA, that's biologically impossible. The overwhelming scientific consensus is crystal clear. Approved vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they are one of the most important tools we have for keeping people healthy.
And that leaves us with one last really important question that's bigger than just vaccines. Knowing how fast these myths can travel,
How can we all get better at telling the difference between a real fact and a convincing fake? In this age of endless information, that's really the challenge for every single one of us.